I'm speaking with Tom Van Deusen, who's a great cartoonist. He has worked with Dennis Eichhorn, and so we're going to talk a lot about that and a lot about his work, and we'll just go from there. Tom, can you talk to us about your connection with Dennis Eichhorn? He's just such a remarkable writer, comparable to Ken Kesey. I'll let you take the floor.
Sure, yeah. Well, I met Eichhorn through Pat Moriarty, who's a great cartoonist. I worked with Eichhorn on the original run of Real Stuff. And I had been a fan of his comics. Max Klotfelter and I'm a good friend of mine, another cartoonist. And he and I collected his comics, and Max started getting his football blog, and through that, he, my phone was, my phone was big as the noises.
Oh, it's fine.
So Max contacted Denny and asked if he was interested in doing any new stories in these football blogs that Denny had sent out. And they weren't really blogs, they were just kind of these mass emails he sent out to all his friends. And but he talked a lot about college football, but he also wrote a lot of like autobiographical stuff. And he hadn't really published anything in probably 20 years, or almost 20 years. And he had these great new stories, and from that, we asked him if he was interested in working with some younger cartoonists, and Cass knew him and wanted to work with him again as well, and he agreed. And I at the time had kind of these ideas of doing a little small-scale publishing work, and I'd self-published for a few years before that my own comics. Mm-hmm. And so to fund it, I did a Kickstarter, and before that we met Dennis and talked to him about it. We met. He was living in Bremerton at the time, and so we drove out there, discussed the deals of the book. I only met him probably 4 or 5 times, but we put together this book, did a Kickstarter that was very successful, almost I think doubled our goal.
Wow.
And so we were able to print a new collection, the 64-page double issue, and we got to work with a lot of great cartoonists, like Noah Van Sciver wanted to do one, mm-hmm. and who else? They got Sean Hurley, who was in the original run of Real Stuff. We got Mary Fleener, who I've been a huge fan of for years. And that was a really cool thing to be able to work with her, and we put out this book, and it was well received. And from there, Dennis had a lot of stories that he hadn't published, and he wanted to get out there, and we were able to do a second collection, and we did that through Last Gasp, because the first book, distribution was really difficult, and mm-hmm. it was a very difficult thing for me. I have a full-time job, and I also do my own cartooning, and it was very difficult for me to publish a book. It was probably the toughest thing I've ever done. And so luckily Last Gasp was willing to publish the second book, and that actually just came out about 3 or 4 months ago.
Yes, and I loved it. I actually picked it up at the Seattle ferry terminal, of all places, and there's a story behind that.
Yeah, what was it doing there?
Well, that's what I was wondering, because I end up over there a number of times, and I'd never seen anything like that, any underground comics at all. And it turns out that his wife would always pick up Denny's New York Times from the Seattle ferry terminal, so I suppose they lived relatively nearby, and so mm-hmm. she thought it was just a natural to have that there.
Oh, that's great.
It's a it's his perfect spot, because all walks of life, and it's a perfect setting for a story.
Was it just sitting there?
No, it was in the newsstand. It was right there.
Okay.
But I was curious to ask you your take on underground comics, because you sit in a really beautiful position. I mean, you've taken off in the last 4 years. Your heart is in underground comics from what I see. For people listening to this, people totally new to it and old hands at it, how would you define underground comics to start off with?
Well, I mean, the old underground comics from the 60s, well, the 70s, or the newer kind of alternative comics?
Well, you could take your pick. How would you define it? I guess it's hard to define you because it is kind of era-based, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, we currently, you know, have it. It's basically anything, I guess, that's not mainstream.
Yeah.
And mainstream usually means, like, genre work. And that's work that's really never interested me. Even growing up, I didn't read superhero comics or action comics or anything like that. I was much more into, you know, Ren and Stimpy and a lot of crazy cartoons that were coming out when I was a kid. And you know, when I finally started getting into like alternative comics when I was in college, like I saw Lee Crumb, and I picked up some work by Chris Ware, and I feel like that all kind of goes hand in hand. It's just comics work that isn't genre fiction usually. And honestly, that's kind of a sad description, because most things aren't genre, you know. Most things aren't action comics or superhero outside of comics, you know. But for some reason, comics are kind of dominated by you know, stuff that's more suited for children. And this stuff, usually underground comics are for adults. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but and alternative comics are usually, you know, they're geared toward adults. They can be comedy, it can be autobiographical. And once I found that work, I was really excited and kind of figured out that I found my calling, you know.
Yeah.
And it took a long time because it's kind of hard to find. Distribution's pretty crummy, and there's not, unless you know about it, it's kind of hard for people to stumble across. And I think that it should have a wider audience. It shouldn't necessarily be quote unquote underground. It should be, you know, in a place like in France, it's like major media. You know, it's not necessarily something that's only for, you know, enthusiasts. It's something that kind of everyone reads. In Japan, it's a good example. Like everyone reads comics.
Well, I'm happy to hear you use the term alternative comics, because I tend to like that, alternative to market-driven mainstream comics.
Right.
How would you describe the scene today, from your vantage point? Because you've got the Intruder and.
There's a lot of stuff coming out. It's amazing. It seems like I meet new cartoonists every day, and with the internet and everything, people are coming out of the woodwork quicker than ever. And there's all these great festivals and stuff. That's why we started. Intruder basically was we'd seen smoke signals that came out of Brooklyn's Desert Island Comics, and we wanted to put out our own of Seattle because we had all been hanging out. There's a great comic community in Seattle, and kind of always has been. And I met like Max Clotfelter and Mark Palm and Ian Fitzgerald and some other folks who we all hung out a lot because we all had similar interests in comics, and we all drew comics. And from there we started working together on a lot of jam comics, where we all kind of collaboratively did these kind of very silly, usually scatological comics. And then we decided to put out a paper, kind of like Smoke Signal. And the first one was free, and people seemed to like it, so we decided to keep doing it. And you know, on top of that, usually there's a lot of people self-publish, and there's no money in it. That's kind of the drag about it. I think it has a lot to do with the distribution channels. There's only one distributor, Diamond.
Yeah.
One major distributor. And Diamond is pretty closed doors when it comes to a lot of this comics I enjoy. It's a drag. And it's kind of a big bottleneck for a lot of small publishers. And I think, Diamond was kind of, it came into existence because of like Marvel and DC. So it's I have my own conspiracy theories about it. I don't worry about it. But.